I'm Brandi. I'm an emerging technology reporter at Nextgov. We're so excited to have you guys here today. We're joined by Francisco from USDA, Rodney from NIST, Andréa from USGS, and Veronica from OPM. So today we're going to talk to everyone about how agencies are working to simultaneously recruit a tech-savvy workforce of the future while also boosting and transforming the workforce of today to stay on the leading edge. And the leading edge is exactly where I want to start. A lot of you are working on it now. I want us to sort of quickly visualize when we think of a workforce of the future. There are a lot of buzzwords that are thrown around right now, right? Automation, human-robot interaction, digital natives, one of my favorite. But how are you anticipating the workforce to actually change over the next 5 to 10 years? What are you picturing when you think of it? Anyone can start.
Well, one place I would start is that I have some good news and bad news, and it's the same. The workforce is going to be more mobile than it's been in the past. And in fact, that's something we recognize in a recent executive order, America's Cybersecurity Workforce Executive Order. So the good news is that you're going to have fresh talent coming and going from your agency, but they're also going to be going to and from public and private sector and departments and agencies. So a couple things we need to do to accommodate that mobility is recognize that retention is an important part of our HR strategy. It's not just recruitment and hiring because we want to retain them, but the retention isn't necessarily going to be the way we've thought about it in the past. So for example, rotational assignments is something we're very much looking forward to as a strategy for facilitating that mobility. So rather than them just leaving on their own, employees choose to stay either within a department or maybe move across a department or agency. And that has kind of a win-win scenario because it gives that employee the ability to be exposed to a new workforce, new system, new ideas and the like, and they bring that same information back. So anyways, this notion of how we facilitate rotations might lead to better retention. But secondly, which is where my organization, NICE, comes in, we have a cybersecurity workforce framework, is if you're an employer or you're that job seeker employee looking to change, if we start to have a standard taxonomy and definition of what the work entails, it makes that mobility easier, both from an employer's perspective as well as from a learner's perspective.
Well, anyone else? How are you thinking about it?
It's in line with what we're looking at as well. And it's not just about, digital natives. That's a big thing, right? Because, my son who's in college is like, he actually works on his phone all the time. I mean, a computer or a laptop is really not that big of a deal for him. He'd rather have his phone. And so that's how our workforce is today. So to understand that, so that the tools and the application and things that we build today have to be to that nature. Has to be inherent to that. So it's got to be truly native to that mobile task force or workforce that we're having today, which is very different. Folks don't want to stick around and 5 years develop something, right? They're trying to see something fast, their development. And so I think that rotational is definitely a big thing for USDA. As most people know, with the Centers of Excellence, we were the lighthouse agency for IT modernization. So what we did is we actually had detailees from within USDA, from different agencies within USDA, that come and help us out. So it wasn't about just getting external workforce to help us, but really internally and saying, okay, you guys are Coalition of the Willing. How can we get you guys better enabled to what we're doing? And so you then becomes the evangelist, if you will, throughout the rest of the organization.
That's really interesting. Do you want to add?
Yeah, if I can just add. So when we think about the president's management agenda, the 3 drivers are supposed to be technology, data, and people. And from OPM's perspective, you can't really have the technology without the people. People first, really, because if the people don't adopt it, you're not going to be able to get as far as you need to with the technology. So that's been our approach. And when we talk about reskilling and upskilling, we've noticed that many employees become very fearful. So we're looking now at how do we create a continuous growth mindset? How do we get employees to expect that their jobs are going to continuously evolve and that rather than having fear around that, they actually have excitement and opportunity around it? And we're starting to see this, for example, FBI has done some of this work already with what they're doing in fingerprinting. All of this has gone digital. They did it all through rotations programs, just as we described. And it was always about putting people first and making sure that they were on board and ready for the change.
That's great.
And then I would just like to say, focusing on the people side is that it's not easy to hire someone into the government. And I think that really has to transform for people to continue coming to the public sector.
And at USDS, you're in a really interesting position. I'm not sure, so forgive me if a lot of you already know this, but you guys serve shorter terms, right? And I was thinking a lot about that. And in some ways, like as a young person entering the workforce, that could be really exciting, but also terrifying because who's to say in 4 years you'll really be able to find a job? So talk to us about what you guys are doing internally to make sure that your present workforce will be ready for what's to come.
Yeah, so I actually lead that initiative post life after USDS because a lot of people that we hire are from the private sector. They have no government experience, and we get them in, get them a clearance, and give them the ability to work and transform public-facing services for the American people. And then a lot of people get bit by the bug and behind the mission of the impact that they can have. And a lot of people are founding their own companies. They're transitioning into other leadership, technical leadership roles within various organizations. Some people are going back to their large organizations for that money. But, we look for mid to senior level folks, and they aren't really, money is not a motivator for them. So they're really looking for homes within the government to continue that impact.
And that's something, money as a motivator is, we're going to get to that in a little bit. But before we dive in, I want to hear a little bit more about the opportunities you guys are using now to boost your present workforce. We know that in May, President Trump passed an executive order to boost the cyber workforce. And there was a lot of attention on sort of new awards and a president's cybersecurity competition. But my question is that enough? What more do you need? And what are you targeting right now?
So a lot of the work NICE does is in the educational sector, so ranging from K through 12 up through higher education, recognizing that cybersecurity and IT as a career is not something that most kids, parents, or grandparents have done. So it starts with career awareness, recognizing the opportunities, and then making sure that curriculum and degrees and all the rest are available to students throughout that kind of academic continuum. But we also want to be really clear that that pipeline alone is not going to fill the current need. And so Veronica mentioned reskilling, but looking at working adults, looking at apprenticeship programs, looking at ways to transition veterans, we need to kind of embrace the training part of academia or education as well. So it's not just what happens in colleges and universities, it's the way that we reskill employees, that we transition the incumbent workforce into this new exciting field as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned a key word here, which is reskilling. It's been pretty exciting to see the beginning of efforts around all these sort of reskilling things within the government. Something interesting, my colleague Aaron Boyd, who you guys saw earlier, he was reporting on the initial class of reskilled cyber workers in the government. And two of the people he talked to actually were just returning into the roles that they were in before. One, because it was too much of a jump down on the GS scale if he would move out, which you can't do. And the other was out of choice. So talk to us about this, what you've seen with reskilling. Francisco, I know you guys have worked with it a lot. How is it worth it if there are these other challenges and issues that come up? And how are you guys working through that?
Sure. Is it worth it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way we can start to instill change. So, the scenario you just talked about, we've seen that as well, right? If you're a GS-14, you want to be reskilled, and whether you're doing cybersecurity or robotics, process automation, it ends up being, maybe a developer is going to be a 12 or 13. That's not conducive to where they want to go. But at least they've been exposed to new technology, to a new way of thinking. And that's the big thing. It's about changing the mindset and saying, okay, I'm not going to continue to do my work the way I'm doing it today, tomorrow, just because that's all I know. So now they're getting exposed to technology and exposed to new things and new ways to do things. And just the process of doing it, doing, human-centered design, doing all these journey maps, doing all these things that are not necessarily specific to just RPA or cybersecurity. It's conducive to everything they do. So I definitely would say it's worth it. Now, is it going to be something, it's a short-term gain? May not be there because they may be limited on the capabilities or the ability to just move around. But at the long term, it actually exposes a lot more of what we're doing in technology, exposes more of that consumer technology mind thought that we don't necessarily have in government.
If I can add, so OPM is now working with the Federal CIO Council to figure out how we can get rotations for all of the folks who did go through the Rescaling Academy to make sure that they get the experience that's required. So you can imagine the vision is that they have the 3 months of training, and then they'll have 9 months of a rotations program where agencies can be exposed to their work, and we figure out how they can be a productive fit within the different CIO shops. So there's still hope, and we're going to figure out how to do this very agilely and be as quick as we can so that skills don't grow stale.
Well, and I feel like it could be a little bit difficult with change management, right? Like, what has the reception been inside of your agencies? Are people who are at high levels excited to sort of start over and learn a new thing? Are they scared? And if they're scared, how are you dealing with that? What's your messaging to your workforce in all this?
There's excitement for sure. And it's at all levels. Now, some of it is the bliss of ignorance, right? So it's like, what am I really getting into? So when people embrace that, then that's brand new things that come about it. You know, in other ones, there is trepidation as well. There is like that fear of the unknown. But if you get just a few folks that can become your catalyst and become your evangelist, it actually helps you actually build it out more into the agency and department.
Yeah, and if I can add, you know, we've been briefing folks at all levels, and there is an excitement. And there's also the recognition that a certain percentage of our workforce will not be doing the kind of work that they do today. And how do we create the opportunities to make sure that they gain either the skills that they'll need in the future or that we have nice landings for them elsewhere in the organization? So there's been a lot of thought around that and how we, again, put people first. And how we introduce them to the new technologies in ways that everyone can participate. There have been examples where folks are actually doing all of the process mapping, for example, for the robotic process automation. People who were bored in their jobs are now excited to come to work again. And then, you know, they're finding new and better ways to do their work. And then there's opportunities at other agencies. So we just think it's going to create more agility and more movement across the organization.
And I think there's a myth that a career is a career ladder where it's always up, 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 up. And so we often talk about career lattices where you may move side to side, or even highways where there's off ramps and on ramps. And that's really true in cybersecurity, where you may be, you know, in a totally different career field and you take an off ramp to get trained and upskilled in cybersecurity, get back on that highway. But it's not always an upward trajectory. But also think of it as a maze. And when you're trying to advance in a maze, you come to a dead end sometimes. And to get out of that dead end, you have to go left and you have to go back, and then you find the way out that's even better than when you started. So I think career pathways have to really recognize that there's multiple ways that you can progress in your career. And it's not always a ladder. It might be a lattice, or it might be a highway, or some other kind of metaphor.
Cool. And now I want to switch to the other side of the coin, which is recruitment. I'm interested in hearing how the skills and educational backgrounds that you guys are really looking for now in recruitment are changing. Something interesting, I was speaking to a doctor from the VA recently, and he was saying he's noticing that they're becoming in recruitment less concerned with making sure that everyone has all the pharmacological tables memorized. That's really, really important. And the people they hire will do that. But they're shifting focus to saying, okay, what are your analytical skills? Can you look at this report and tell me if it's real or fake information? So, and that's in the VA. So how is this changing in terms of recruitment?
We're asking agencies to be really thoughtful around how they assess candidates. This will not only get the process moving faster, but it'll allow them to train or find exactly the skills you're talking about, right? Those critical thinking skills. So we've been piloting a effort right now with US Digital Services, Interior, and I'm forgetting one, another agency, HHS. That's right. Thank you. And what we've been doing is we involve the subject matter experts right at the very beginning of the process, as soon as the resumes come in, and we have them help us identify the right talent. And then another group of folks is involved in that structured interview process. And then in some instances, you can even give people problems so that you can find out, do they have the right competencies? Are they able to team well? Are they able to solve complicated problems? And so we're we're seeing more of that throughout the agencies. We've been asking everyone to do it for about 10 years now, so we're really excited.
Yeah. And just to highlight that, because the way USDS hires is not necessarily scalable, or it wasn't until this amazing pilot happened, because we are a small team. But the thing, whenever anyone comes in, everyone is expected to participate in the recruitment process. If that is interviewing candidates, reviewing resumes, that particular person in that particular community of practice, be that design, engineering, product management, they are the experts. They know what to look for in a resume, in an interview. Buzzwords, just because you know all the buzzwords doesn't make you qualified for a job. And I think that's been the case for a long time, and just really trying to transform that, and working with OPM to make that happen is exciting.
So the work that NICE does is not exclusive to the federal government. We work with private sector employers as well. And we've done a lot of work with the Aspen Cybersecurity Working Group that has a lot of major companies represented. And the one thing I would say in general to this forum this morning in your questions is that we need to modernize the people process, the hiring, recruitment, retention, the whole HR process, alongside of modernizing IT, particularly in the federal government. And I think the private sector is leading that in a couple different ways. One is updating and modernizing position descriptions that really reflect the work to be done versus the work that was done 20 years ago, or maybe the work that other organizations are doing. And again, that's where our framework can be really helpful, because it has detailed tasks, knowledge, skills, abilities that not only employers are informing us as to what they need, but that in turn can inform the education and training providers about the type of competencies that the job seekers need in the future. So kind of modernizing that process is really important. But secondly, it's not only the employer-driven part of it, is it's looking at, what are our policies? What's our workplace culture? What are we, the mission, I think, that we heard described here? How are we actually attracting and bringing, whether it's young people or older people, into the government? I mean, every government office should have a view like this conference room, and it doesn't. It's 40-year-old office spaces with cubicles where there isn't a lot of collaboration and innovation, and that's certainly not an attractive workplace. So I think, modernizing our policies, our procedures, our workplace cultures, and all the rest is going to be really important, with especially that recruitment part.
Absolutely. And I want to switch. I know, Veronica, in a previous role, you were OPM's first director, I think, of diversity and inclusion. So I'm interested in the recruitment space. How are agencies really adopting, or are they, new approaches around recruiting the most inclusive and diverse workforce?
Right. So what we tell everyone, it seems pretty simple, but if you want to find diverse candidates, you have to go to where the diverse candidates are, right? And so oftentimes we always just go to the same place, and we've joked, you've heard the post and pray. We'd post on USA Jobs and we'd pray the right people would come. And so what we've gone back and done with our HR professionals is said, let's work together to figure out where we can find diverse candidates. And then when we go through any process, even our reskilling processes, we're being really thoughtful. Are we inviting a wide swath of people from all across our organization to apply to these positions? One thing to think about, we had one agency that was able to develop a much more diverse cadre at the SES level, because when they ran their candidate development program, they invited people from all across the organization. They knocked on doors and said, have you thought about applying? Because they knew people had skill. It sounds easy, and it really was that easy. When people knew that someone else saw them as having the right skills for an executive position, it got them excited and they applied. So sometimes it's just about knocking on the right door, walking somewhere and saying, we're interested in you. And so that's what we're still pushing with agencies. And then, of course, there's always the data analytics around it. What gets measured gets done. And when agencies are paying attention to this, they find that they're able to attract more diverse candidates.
So I know, which I do want to mention, I met some of your colleagues at Grace Hopper celebration last week,
right,
which was great. So that's one approach that we take all conferences, and we do roundtable meetups as well, but those are all over the country. We try to bring in talent from all over the country and all types of backgrounds to really help transform, the services that we're providing and helping with. And then also one approach that we do, all of our interviews are done over the phone. So that minimizes any type of bias that you might not know that is happening when you're meeting someone face to face. So that's just one technique that we incorporate.
Oh, wow. So for us, it's really been about just looking at the the folks, and kind of similar to the SES story, just looking at not traditionally what the IT folks 2210 say, okay, let's recruit them. Take an example, the detail I talked about. When we looked at getting folks from within USDA, we said, okay, this is open for all of USDA, whether you're a 2210 IT person or whether you're a program person that's doing loans in the middle of America. So much more inclusiveness, and knowing that in today's IT world, you don't have to be a programmer. It's very different than what it was, even 5-10 years ago. Now it's about understanding the problem solving we talked about earlier. Understanding, okay, analytically, can you basically get to where we need to get to from a overall program and mission perspective, not just about the IT sake.
And I would just add a couple things. Again, NICE doesn't do all this work ourselves. We have great partners across the country, but it's a well-known fact that in IT and cybersecurity, women and people of color are underrepresented. And so we partner very closely with those organizations, both in academia and industry, that have women in cybersecurity conferences and events to include mentoring and career opportunities and the like for women in particular, or girls. Gen Cyber, which is a program run by the National Security Agency funded by NSF, happens at colleges and universities and schools across the country. And some of them are very focused on those underrepresented populations as well. Similarly, working with the populations we want to attract in terms of people of color. And so one of our big areas of emphasis this year is to increase the capacity building of our minority serving institutions to include the historically Black colleges, the Hispanic institutions, the tribal colleges and universities. So, given the shortage we have in IT and cybersecurity, our strategy's got to look at those groups that are underrepresented and figure out how to really help increase their participation.
And then I would like to highlight another point. One thing is that we don't look for specific educational backgrounds, especially in the technical fields. People come from all different walks of life, and their paths to get there are not always normal. And so we really look, and that's why we have a personal touch in anyone that we interact with and engage with, to make sure giving them the ability to tell us their story versus just kind of going off a piece of paper, which they might not promote themselves as well, versus, explaining what they've done and how they've gotten there.
Awesome. And another sort of part of all this is that the government sort of already struggles with competing for the best workers when it comes to its commercial counterparts. I think that's probably going to get further disrupted in the coming years when Amazon's HQ2 comes to the DMV, as well as we're seeing a lot of other corporations shifting to offices here. How is the government going to keep up and how is it now, and how will it really keep up with vying for top talent against these sort of commercial powerhouses?
So for USDA, for us, it really focuses on the mission, right? So whether it's you're in the military, and you talk about, okay, you want to be a war fighter, you want to do these type of things. And for us at USDA, it's about focusing on the mission, getting to the farmers, producers, ranchers, rural America, and say, okay, this is what we can make a difference in people's lives. And that's really has to be kind of the integral part of touching somebody's emotion. Not necessarily about the wallet, because at the end of the day, that's kind of a fleeting thing, but you make a big difference in what you're doing for the American public. That makes a difference. And we're talking about not just farmers, we're talking about food. So if you ate today, then you've touched something that we've been a part of at USDA. So that for us has been a big thing. That's something we're doing now. And then we look at the future, that's going to be a big selling point.
Yeah, I wanted to give two specific examples. So a kind of well-known scholarship program, CyberCore Scholarship for Service, gives 2 years or more tuition fees reimbursement for students who get a college education and then come and give service to the federal government. And it's a very competitive program at the college and university where they apply. The National Science Foundation funds it. But many of those students who are obligated to do service for the federal government end up staying and ended up becoming part of our permanent workforce. But a more important and exciting opportunity is the Cyber Talent Initiative that was only recently announced, which is a public-private partnership. So Microsoft, Workday, MasterCard are paying student loan debt. So it's very different than the scholarship I described, but paying off student loan debt to come and work for the federal government for 2 years and then transition to the private sector. And it's that type of mobility, again, I talked about this, kind of a win-win for the government as well as the private sector, that they have employees who have the benefit of public service as well as government experience and then move to the private sector workforce and possibly come back to the government again in the future. So we need more creative initiatives like those two examples to really address with some of the recruitment issues.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to add, for those who are interested, we have cybercareers.gov, and there's this whole area that talks about what's great about being in government, right? So it is about mission, ultimately. That's one area where, to anyone, we can say, if you have a passion about something, you want to help the American people, come join us. The other part is we've got great work-life flexibilities, and depending on the kind of work that you do, you can do your work, feel like you're doing something meaningful, but also have a life. And that's a really big part of what we try to push out there. If you think about what we have in terms of pension plans and mobility from one department to another department, imagine that 67% of our vacancies are filled by people moving from one position to another position. And if you want to move fast in government and you want to be strategic about it, you can. And you can even do it when you're not trying. I know I started an honors program as an attorney and thought, this is what I'm probably going to do for the rest of my life, right? Be an attorney. I'm no longer doing any kind of legal work whatsoever. And in about 10 years, I was able to go from an entry-level attorney position to the SES. So that kind of gives you an idea of what you can do. And when we bring that to folks, they get excited and think that's something I want to join.
And then I had talked to so many different people that are excited about changing digital services for the American people and things that they interact with. And so I think just going back to what everyone says, it's the mission, and everyone has a very similar mission. And I think it's those are the people that will end up staying a long time. And so competition, not a big deal.
Yeah. I know it's not an easy question to hear, but in the end, for people who work for the government, do you think that for a lot, the mission will go as far as money does as a motivator?
Well, to a point, right?
Or is the government going to have to shift and start really thinking about pay scales to keep up?
Yeah, so we are looking at that. I'd say at OPM, we're looking at what the opportunities are out there. But we do have student loan forgiveness.
Great.
We do have what we call the 3 Rs, which are recruitment, relocation, and retention incentives. So we have tools out there, and what we need to do is help agencies get better at using them. So we have more flexibilities than we think, I'd say.
And our view at NICE is that it's not just about more and more pay, it's about more and more supply. And so when we get more people introduced into this field and participating, then it's going to level off in terms of some of the price competition that we currently experience. And it's not that the current initiatives to pay people equitably aren't important, but we're really focused on increasing the supply to make the issue about pay competitiveness not the most important topic of discussion.
I'd love to open the floor for questions from you guys. Does anyone have any questions?
We said it all.
Okay. I think we have a microphone coming right around. Thanks so much.
Yes, my name's Gabrielle Scandoni, and I work right across the river at HUD, FHA. I think one of the things that I heard, which, having over 40 years of government service, that one of the things, I don't know if you're doing it as part of your initiative. I'm an information systems security officer. I've also been an accountant. I've been a financial analyst, and I have a lot of program and IT technical experience. And it seems to me that in doing the reskill or rebranding, that I look at everything, everybody should know security. It doesn't matter what your job is, right? If you don't know that in the workforce now, you will not make it. And you have to have those things coupled. And I wasn't sure if that's part of what you're doing with your training initiatives, because I know I do a lot of training to people, as you've mentioned, who've been around a long time, who are afraid because they hear the word IT or cyber and they run away. And I'm like, no, think about what your mission is. Think about your program. And you can tie those to every type of internal control, system security requirement. And I wasn't sure if that is a focus that you're doing as well.
Great question.
So one thing I would say, again, back to our NICE framework, it's really about a workforce skilled in cybersecurity. And this event is a great example where, you've got people up here that were talking about acquisitions and procurement. They need to know the cybersecurity requirements for your organization and entity. Talked about lawyers and policy. They need to know about the cybersecurity requirements of your organization. Auditors. So it's not just the technical or the IT folks. It's really people who touch or impact the cybersecurity posture of your organization need, whether it's awareness or training or potentially more official education. That's very much the scope of our framework, recognizing it's everyone's responsibility, much like this month of October and Cybersecurity Awareness Month continues to promote.
I'll also add that one thing we're looking at OPM is how do we do agility training? We're going to start with our executive core, but to us, when we talk about agility, that also means how we use technology and how we keep that growth mindset as we approach all aspects of our work. And our vision is that we'll not only do it at that most senior level as part of the pilot, but that we'll go through and do it with every part of the workforce. Now, this does sound overwhelming if you think about it, 2.1 million people. But if we include all of the chief human capital officers from the 24 departments and agencies and slowly move it down, we believe we can get there. We've done it before, and so we'll need to do it again, and that's the plan.
Any other questions? Well, I have one more for you guys before we finish up. If there was one thing you're missing that you could have now that would really help you either beef up your current workforce or do your job better, some form of technology, what would it be?
I'm looking this way so they can start and I can think.
Well, I was looking that way too. A good question. There's one thing I could have that I don't have. Better marketing. That would be internal marketing. We're IT geeks. So marketing is not always our best strong suit. So I would say that would be an area that we just need to get stronger at. And it would help us just all around, not only in recruitment, the retention, and also, but just even in cybersecurity, marketing it so it's not something humdrum, dry that somebody gets scared of, but, better understanding and advertising, so I would say that is just something that we need to build up more.
Yeah, and I didn't immediately have a response, but I'm going to kind of follow up on what I said before in terms of the awareness that we need for all the employees. And I'm going to kind of turn it around a little bit to say that a lot of the work we do in cybersecurity is reactive and responding to incidents because users click on phishing emails or user error or insider threats, all those people things we talk about that need to be mitigated through either awareness or some type of policy or follow-up. But to also add that a lot of our cybersecurity challenges come from the product development itself. And so, again, our framework applies to software developers, it applies to engineers, it applies to architects, all those people who should be building security and by design. And if we could put more resources and more time and effort into building things secure and building in privacy and building in accessibility for people with disabilities, the less time we would have to spend after the fact recovering, responding, and investigating incidents.
So I have a lot. I'll mention one. We sit under OMB, which is a part of EOP. So we have a lot of restrictions to things. I would love an applicant tracking system versus Salesforce. Love Salesforce, but that is not what it's meant for. And that would make, and I would love to be able to actually access LinkedIn because it's not really available on our work computers. And two of many.
And since I've had all this time to think about it, I'm going to go with where I started. I think those three drivers of the president's management agenda, which is technology, data, and people, if we really all focused on this as a government and did this within each of our programs, understanding the role that those three pieces play to help us succeed, I do believe we would be able to transform the way we do our work.
Yeah. Well, that's it for this panel. Thank you so much for sticking with us today and being here. We really appreciate it.